Today we're going to continue our work with decimals by comparing and ordering decimals. So our learning targets for today are that we'll be able to compare decimals, meaning when I've got a couple of numbers with decimals in them, I can accurately decide which one is larger and which one is less, or which one is greater and which one's less. And then also being able to order a set of decimal numbers. And what that would mean is to take a set of numbers and put them in order, either from least to greatest or greatest to least. So starting with comparing decimals, if we have this question, which is greater, 0 and 4/10 or 0 and 34/100? This slide is showing that we use place value to help us with that comparison, and this chart is set up in a way to help us do that. I'm going to go from left to right when comparing these numbers. Starting with the ones, I see that both of them have 0 in the ones place. So move over to the tenths. We see that one of them has 4/10 and the other has 3/10. So in asking which one is greater, 4/10 would be greater than 3/10. So now we can see, if you think about the blocks, the manipulatives that we use, 4 longs would be greater than 3 longs. Also, something else to keep in mind, I can put a 0 in the hundredths place when I have a digit in the tenths place, because 4/10 is equivalent to 40 hundredths. So that's another way I could also compare. I know that 40 is greater than 34. So either way, by comparing just the number in the tenths column, or by comparing the set of numbers up to hundredths, 40 versus 34, either way is showing me that 0 and 4/10 is greater than 0 and 34 hundredths. So I can use these signs here. 0 and 4/10 is greater than 0 and 34 hundredths. So which would be larger between these two numbers, 0 and 76 hundredths or 0 and 8/10? 0 and 76 hundredths would be less than 0 and 8/10, or in other words, the larger number is 8/10. So if I follow that same strategy of comparing places, 0 in both the ones places, so then moving over to the tenths, I have 7/10 versus 8/10. 8/10 would be larger. Just for clarification, I could also think about the hundredths. Since I don't have a digit in the hundredths place over in 0 and 8/10, that is equivalent to 0 and 80 hundredths. 8/10 is equivalent to 80 hundredths if I put my 0 placeholder in there. Or even if I think about these as a fraction, 76 hundredths versus 80 hundredths, I know that 80 hundredths is going to be larger. How about here? Which is larger, 0 and 21 hundredths or 0 and 12 hundredths? Pause and think. 0 and 21 hundredths is greater than or larger than 0 and 12 hundredths. We had zeros in the ones, and then a 2 in the tenths versus a 1 in the tenth. So 21 hundredths is going to be greater than 12 hundredths. How about these? Notice the directions have changed. Which of these is smaller if you were to answer that question? Pause and think. Did you answer that 4 and 6 hundredths is smaller than 4 and 60 hundredths, or less than? So same strategy, they both have 4 in the ones place. Moving over to the tenths, I have 0 tenths versus 6 tenths. Or if I think of this number up to the hundredths, I have 6 hundredths versus 60 hundredths. 6 hundredths would be less than or smaller than 60 hundredths. And how about here? Pause and think and come back. Since we've got 12 in both of the tens and one places, and I have 3 tenths and 3 tenths. 3 tenths is equivalent to 30 hundredths. There is not a smaller number here. We would say that these numbers are equal. 12 and 3 tenths is equal to 12 and 30 hundredths. Now moving along to ordering, we would follow the same steps if I were to take a set of decimal numbers and put them in order. I would either put them in order from least to greatest or greatest to least. So if I've been given this set of numbers right here, there's 3 numbers. The diagram shows comparing by place. So again, if I write them all in that place value chart, they all had 0 in the ones place. So we would move to the tenths place. A couple of them have a 6 in the tenths place versus one with a 2. So we know right away we have found our smallest number. If I'm going from least to greatest, the number that is least is 0 and 23 hundredths. So then looking at our final 2 in the hundredths place versus 0 in the hundredths place, I know that 2 hundredths is going to be greater than 60 hundredths. So that would tell me that my middle number is going to be 0 and 6 tenths, which is equivalent to 0 and 60 hundredths, with the greatest number being 0 and 62 hundredths. So that was a perfect example of that number 6 tenths is equivalent to 60 hundredths. So when this person was filling in the place value chart, they had a 6 in the tenths place and they didn't have anything in the hundredths place. So you can put a 0 placeholder in the hundredths place because 6 tenths is equivalent to 60 hundredths. So what would be the order of these decimal numbers from least to greatest? Pause and record and come back. We've got 0 in all of the ones places. As far as tenths, we've got a couple that have a 1 in the tenths place. So out of these two then, 15 hundredths would be less than 18 hundredths, which would make 0 and 2 tenths or 0 and 20 hundredths our greatest number. So least to greatest, I've got these. How about this set of numbers from least to greatest? Pause and think, come back and check. All of these numbers have a 2 in the ones place. So we're going to go ahead and look at the tenths place. It looks like our least or our smallest number is going to have a 1 in the tenths place. So 2 and 17 hundredths would be smallest, followed by 2 and 31 hundredths, with 2 and 8 tenths or 80 hundredths being our greatest number. How about these from least to greatest? How does your answer compare to mine? From least to greatest, we've got 1 and 4 hundredths, followed by 1 and 14 hundredths, with the greatest number being 2 and 4 hundredths. How about these? Notice the directions have changed. order these numbers from greatest to least. So which is the greatest first? If I look at the ones place, I can see that the 2 in the ones place would be our greatest number, followed by 22 hundredths, with the least number or smallest number being 20 hundredths. How did you do? And how about these? Last practice problem, notice the directions. Now looking at ones, they've all got 6 in the ones place. All right, so moving over to the tenths, I'm noticing a couple of 3s, and one number has a digit in the hundredths place, the other doesn't. So you can put a 0 placeholder there to help you determine that 32 hundredths is going to be greater than 30 hundredths, with our smallest number being 6 and 23 hundredths. For practice today, choosing one of these options, we've got a worksheet you could do. So if you like these worksheets, you can either just pull it up and write your answers on another sheet of paper, or if you like printing it off and you have that capability, you can do that as well. The answers are on the very last slide of this lesson for you to self-check. We also have a couple of great IXLs, so that would be another great way to practice comparing and ordering decimals. Once you have completed your practice, the must-do today is to click on this link that will take you to a Google form. So it's got 6 questions. It's kind of like a little quiz. It will give you your score as soon as you are done to tell you for that instant feedback of how you've done. So there are questions on there asking you to compare and order decimals. Make sure you're following directions.